the Ukrainian armed forces burned the Russians in a cauldron. This happened near Gulyaypole, but at the epicenter of the battle, they hit the occupiers with such firepower that even the propagandists fell silent. And near Pokrovsk, it's not just losses anymore, it's a catastrophe. In Russia, they're already whispering numbers that make your blood run cold. Emergency peace talks, marked top secret, have reached the final stage. All the behind-the-scenes intrigues have been leaked online. Putin provoked NATO, and now Europe is preparing an apocalypse for him. Germany has declassified a strike plan that will make the Kremlin explode. Turkey has made up its mind. Troops are heading to Ukraine. Erdogan is striking Putin right in the heart. Ankara is breaking ties with Moscow, and tens of thousands of Turkish soldiers are already on the move. Shock, Russia is plunging into total darkness. Russians will greet the new year by candlelight and with empty refrigerators. This is revenge from which Russia will never recover. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot? Shock! In the south, the occupiers were swept away in the Gulyaypole direction. The Russians had already reported capturing the district center, but the response they received was so strong that their propaganda barely had time to shut up. The Russians were simply burned in a hellish cauldron. And then there's Pokrovsk. The Russians are taking such heavy losses that even in Russia people have started whispering about a catastrophe. What's happening on these and other sections of the front? Watch.
In the south, control over the situation in the Gulyaypole direction has been restored. Field, more than 20 attempts to storm our positions have been repelled in the area of the settlement, and there was no new breakthrough, according to the Southern Defense Forces.
Of Ukraine, a vast Eastern European country known for its rich history, diverse landscapes, and resilient people, playing a crucial role in the geopolitical landscape of the region. However, there are rivers, there are groves, where it is possible to hold on to the positions we currently have.
As it became known, after the Russians advanced in this direction, the command decided to transfer part of the reserves to Gulyaypole. At the same time, Russia has already rushed to claim that its troops have entered the district center itself. However, this information is refuted by our Center for Countering Disinformation. The fake news from Russian public channels about the occupation of the village of Vysoke has also not been confirmed.
They have only minimally approached our heavily fortified area, specifically our crucial logistics center. They are trying to send separate groups to the outskirts. In Gulyaypole, intense fighting is once again taking place. There, our defenders have apparently received some reinforcements and resources. And there is a struggle to stabilize the situation in this direction.
At the same time, analysts say that the main focus of the enemy's efforts remains Pokrovsk. Attacks are taking place around the clock both in the city itself and on its outskirts in hopes of encircling the Ukrainian group.
The enemy controls most of the city of Pokrovsk, including the south and the center, and is trying to carry out such actions, as well as gradually encircle it, tightening the ring around Myrnohrad.
However, in the endless assaults on the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are suffering colossal losses. Our command does not hide this. The main task of the Ukrainian armed forces today is to inflict maximum damage on the enemy group. And the defense forces are handling this excellently.
The losses are so great that they have to use reserves that in theory were not intended to enter Pokrovsk. And even with operational reserves, Russia cannot take Pokrovsk. Right now, on average, more than 200 enemy bodies are being left per square kilometer. That is killed and wounded, and that is an enormous number.
At the same time, in addition to defending, our military in Pokrovsk sometimes manage to advance as well. In particular, as local reports indicate, enemy clearing operations are periodically carried out up to the railway line, which now serves as a kind of dividing line in the city.
The defense forces are indeed succeeding in counterattacks which are being carried out, including near Pokrovsk. We're talking about Kupiansk, we're talking about almost all our locations where the Russians are trying to advance.
Speaking of Kupiansk, according to Putin himself, the city is surrounded and under Russian control. In reality, there is no encirclement at all, and there are fewer and fewer Russians in the settlement with each passing day.
Fewer and fewer. This persistent and undeniable trend, which is now becoming increasingly evident and clearly observable in the strategic region of Kupiansk, unequivocally shows that the dedicated and resilient defense forces, with unwavering determination and through painstaking efforts, are steadily, meter by painstaking meter, nevertheless managing to systematically and effectively clear our precious Ukrainian land of the insidious and entrenched enemy forces, reclaiming what is rightfully ours with every step forward.
And good news came yesterday from the occupied territories. In particular, details have emerged about the strike on Crimea. Thus, the General Staff reported that the Panzer Swan and Tortu-M air defense systems were attacked on the peninsula. After that, drones managed to destroy the Orion and forepost drone warehouses, as well as strike a command post and a concentration of enemy personnel.
Local Z channels were in a panic, claiming that all sorts of devices were flying in, even Mavics, and Mavics have a range of 10 kilometers. Where were they launched from and by whom? Well, it's clear it wasn't the Ukrainian military. So then, who was it and from where? So, these are those very same naval drones, whose involvement was again confirmed by Z channels, and which apparently served as mini aircraft carriers, delivering Mavics. The Mavics would then fly in and destroy the target. In this sense, Mavics are actually the perfect tool. That is, if they can be delivered to the coastline.
Then after that, these are practically indestructible tools.
So essentially, the defense forces used a new tactic where one large drone delivers many smaller ones to the attack site. And considering that everything went successfully, it looks like Russia's rear areas will soon face significantly more problems.
Urgently, under the label secret, peace negotiations with the Kremlin are reaching a new level. The White House is pressuring Kyiv and forcing it to make dangerous concessions. All the behind-the-scenes intrigues, secret negotiations, and shocking details of the preparations for peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow. Watch.
Scandals are no obstacle to negotiations. Kyiv is preparing for the next rounds.
There will be important negotiations next week. Not only for our delegation, but for me personally as well. And we are preparing a solid foundation for such negotiations. Ukraine will stand firmly on its feet. It will always stand. Thank you to everyone who is helping us.
The preparations for further negotiations were marked by yet another extraordinary event. Anti-corruption authorities conducted searches at the home of Andriy Yermak, the head of the Ukrainian negotiating team.
Today, NABU and SAP are indeed carrying out procedural actions at my home. There are no obstacles for the investigators. They were given full access to the apartment and my lawyers were present on site, cooperating with law enforcement. I am providing full cooperation from my side.
As a result of the searches, no charges have been brought. But already on Thursday evening, Yermak submitted his resignation. Meanwhile, the Kremlin received a modified peace plan from the US and Ukraine during the negotiations in Geneva.
The US handed over to Russia the parameters of the plan that had been agreed with Kyiv in Geneva. Discussion of the document is scheduled for next week.
It is now absolutely clear to everyone, especially after the leak of these recordings, conversations between Dmitriev, Ushakov, and Ubitkov about the so-called United States plan, the peace plan, that this was a special operation by the Kremlin.
After the previous 28-point US plan was leaked to the press, causing a serious stir and a wave of criticism, the White House classified the latest version of the peace plan. And now even European diplomats do not know what is in the document.
This is an unprecedented situation from a diplomatic point of view. None of us have this information.
Meanwhile, Viktor Orban, Putin's Trojan horse in Europe, arrived in Moscow for a visit. At a meeting with the Hungarian Prime Minister, Putin tried to revive the idea of negotiations with Trump in Budapest.
This was Donald's proposal. Regarding this particular proposal, he immediately stated that we currently have very good relations with Hungary, and you also have good relations, and so do I. Therefore, I strongly suggest this specific option. Of course, we would be happy to agree. Go to Donald, go to Donald. And if during our negotiations it comes to, yes, using the Budapest venue, I would also be very glad about that. So,
in fact, Orban's visit, for example, to Hungary is precisely about Moscow setting up the next trap. And all this is happening in parallel with them supposedly considering the United States peace plan already revised in Geneva. No, we need to be very clear that they are not interested in the revised plan.
Moscow's goal is to pull the wool over Trump's eyes. Lies, manipulation, distortion of concepts, and simulated activity. Putin and his gang are doing everything possible to avoid taking real steps toward ending the war, while at the same time not damaging relations with Washington.
Now we can already see that at this stage, Pesh's agenda is starting to reappear again. And of course, without Kiev and without Brussels as a potential meeting place for Trump and Putin. And naturally, Putin, or rather, will be pushing Trump toward a kind of second Alaska. Because, as they constantly put it, these 28 points were made taking into account the spirit of anchorage. Now, the Russians will try to invoke the spirit of anchorage.
The best evidence of the aggressor's absolutely non-peaceful intentions is the battlefield, where the occupiers are only increasing the intensity of their assault operations, continuing their offensive in Donbass and the Zaporizhzhia direction.
Breaking news: Europe is exploding with resolve. Putin has crossed the line by attacking NATO, and now the entire continent is rising up with a response that will become the Kremlin's nightmare of the century. What Europe is preparing will turn the entire geopolitical landscape upside down. Shock! Germany has developed a top-secret strike plan. Tensions are rising not by the day, but by the minute. All the details coming up.
Europe is preparing to respond to Russia's attacks. MEPs propose to defend together, learn from Ukraine, and tighten sanctions against Russia and Belarus, according to Deutsche Welle. With
Russia, you have to speak in its own language. Russia understands only the language of force. Russia has an excellent relationship with Turkey, despite the fact that Turkey shot down its plane and did not say it was a mistake. They apologized for what they did, but at the same time made it clear, we warned you.
a day later, the publication Politico also reported that Europe is considering retaliatory actions against Russia.
As of now, it's too early to talk about any more serious response from Europe. It seems to me, unfortunately, that it's still too soon. Even though it's obvious that aggression against Europe from the Russian Federation has been going on for a long time, whether it's Russian drones flying in or drones that take off in Europe but are most likely launched by people connected to the Russian Federation. Europe is still not psychologically ready to go as far as, let's say, using military mechanisms of pressure.
According to journalist sources, the Kremlin's potential retaliation ideas range from joint offensive cyber operations and faster, more coordinated identification of the sources of hybrid attacks to unexpected NATO-led military exercises. According to the Wall Street Journal's description, Germany's plan appears to be more concrete. The country has developed a secret plan to prepare for a possible war with Russia.
Germany in 22 also thought, well, maybe we should just sacrifice Ukraine and that's it. But in 2023, sometime closer to the end of the year, the German Council on Foreign Relations prepared a report that included the phrase that in the event of Ukraine's defeat, a war between Germany and Russia would be a prospect in 6 to 10 years. In other words, it's not that the war would be cancelled, it could just be postponed, but it would be more, let's say, over a longer period it will still happen. Later in Germany, they said that no, it wouldn't be 6 to 10 years. The war could start in as little as a year.
In just over 2 years, the Germans created a document that provides for sending up to 800,000 NATO troops, including German and US units, to a hypothetical Eastern Front line. Sources from the Wall Street Journal claim that the plan details the logistical routes along which the troops are to be deployed.
Naturally, doing this on the territory of Ukraine is more acceptable to them than allowing it on their own soil. But what does it mean to do this on the territory of Ukraine? It means that Germany will not send its troops to Ukrainian territory to fight against Russia. So far, we have not seen any serious signals from our European partners indicating a readiness to send their troops to Ukraine. But there are discussions. Emmanuel Macron sometimes talks about it, but somehow this idea, it doesn't really find much approval among the European Union partners.
By continuing its aggression, Russia must understand that in Ukraine it may face not only the armed forces of Ukraine, but also other military forces defending the sovereignty of their own countries. Thunder over the Kremlin. Turkey is ready to send its troops into Ukraine. Erdogan delivers the most painful blow to Putin. Ankara's new turn could change the entire course of the war. Turkey is rapidly severing ties with Moscow and moving closer to Kyiv, the US, and the EU. This geopolitical shift is something the Kremlin is powerless to stop. More details to follow.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Recep Erdogan has once again stabbed Putin in the back. The president of Turkey did this right after his latest meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. At that time, both leaders behind closed doors reportedly discussed a number of very important issues regarding a ceasefire in Ukraine and subsequent security guarantees for official Kyiv.
Both President Erdogan and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the talks were constructive and positive, although no real details about the negotiations themselves were provided.
This sparked an even greater wave of rumors in political circles, as some reliable sources allegedly claimed that Erdogan was trying to persuade Zelensky to accept capitulation and agree to the Kremlin's proposal. Others, on the contrary, insisted that the Turkish president was discouraging the Ukrainian leader from accepting Putin's peace plan and was urging an increase in military production.
They also discussed the growing defense cooperation, stating that the results of this collaboration will be seen in the future.
And here is the result. The Turkish Ministry of Defense has officially announced its readiness to deploy troops in Ukraine. The troops are reportedly on high alert, and Ankara is ready to send a contingent as soon as tomorrow.
Wherever there is a need for peace, security and stability, the Turkish armed forces are the first to come to mind. This is the clearest evidence of the capabilities, effectiveness, deterrent potential and authority of the Turkish Air Force.
It seems that Erdogan has made his choice. He deserves credit for that. He has been extremely skillful all these years. He managed to sit on two chairs at once. He managed to help Ukraine while at the same time buying energy resources and weapons from Moscow and still being a member of NATO. In
the first few years of this conflict, Erdogan stated that he was essentially the only person who had good relations both with Moscow and with Ukraine, was a NATO member, and also had close ties with Washington.
However, as time goes on, it becomes increasingly difficult and far less appealing for Erdogan to continue his friendship with the bloody Russian dictator. After the latest sanctions imposed on Russia, Ankara can no longer buy oil and gas in the previous volumes at discounted prices, which means that Turkey has no reason to coddle Putin and Russia anymore.
It is worth noting that over the past few months, Turkey's relations with Moscow seem to have cooled somewhat. Erdogan still communicates with Putin, but not as often as before. There have been fewer personal meetings. And one of the factors contributing to this is that with Trump's election as president, Turkey has significantly improved its relations with Washington. And especially the personal ties between Erdogan and Trump have become very close.
But for the Kremlin, the growing friendship between Trump and Erdogan threatens disaster. Without the Turkish president's blessing, Russia could lose a huge share of its grey imports and dual-use goods, among other things, which are actively brought in through Turkey.
The process of restricting and reducing economic contacts with Russia is underway in all directions. Turkey was the largest partner of the Russian Federation for a long time, not only in the energy sector, but also with a simply colossal amount of economic interaction. But Turkey will also be cutting back.
As for aid to Ukraine, it seems that Ankara is giving its companies the green light here. After the loud statements from the Turkish Ministry of Defense about sending its contingent to our country, a number of Turkish companies simultaneously announced the establishment of joint military production. So it is quite possible that very soon, not only Ukrainian, but also Turkish missiles and drones, which until recently were friendly to the Kremlin, will be flying at Russian oil refineries deep behind enemy lines.
Apocalypse in Russia. The new year is under threat of a total energy collapse. Muscovites and regional residents prepare for complete darkness. Ukrainian armed forces tore Russia's energy sector to shreds in retaliation for occupiers' attacks, and the disaster scale is only growing. What awaits Putin and Russians? Stay tuned to find out.
The Ukrainian armed forces are significantly increasing both the number and effectiveness of strikes on Russian heating and power generation facilities. The actions of the Ukrainian defense forces are a response to the ongoing attacks on Ukraine's civilian and critical infrastructure.
In order to somehow bring this war to a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their air force. That's why it became necessary, and I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at enterprises of Russia's military-industrial complex and its energy system.
By trying to leave Ukrainians without power, the Russian dictator is condemning millions of Russians to a dark and cold winter.
If, for example, a blackout is threatened in the capital of Ukraine, the Kremlin must realize that a blackout will also come to the Russian capital.
This is Belgorod. Basically, there's no electricity anywhere in Belgorod at all.
Since the beginning of November, Ukraine has carried out dozens of strikes on Russian electrical substations. Long-range drones are cutting off power in occupied Donetsk and Crimea.
Basically, charge your phones. It looks like they've decided to cut off our power everywhere. I've already counted more than 30 of them.
Kalushskaya, 32, darkness, and then it keeps going. Darkness, darkness, darkness.
And cruise missiles and jet-powered drones are introducing millions of residents in the European part of Russia, including Moscow and the Moscow region, to the delights of blackouts. In addition to Ukrainian weapons, we must not forget about the deliveries of Western arms, which Ukraine has also recently begun using to strike Russian territory.
The corresponding approval has been obtained. Therefore, we can say that the territories of the Rostov, Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk regions are within the strike zone. Of Western strike systems, I want to emphasize again ATACMS, Scalp, Storm Shadow. Only accordingly, the modernized version of the S-200 surface-to-air missile system.
Before the onset of winter, Ukraine possesses a wide range of powerful long-range weaponry. Bark, Peklo, Polyanitsia, and FP-1 rocket drones, as well as Flamingo and Long Neptune cruise missiles, can reach the largest Russian cities, including heating and power supply facilities in Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Taking into account the climatic features of the Russian Federation and the tactical and technical characteristics of the Ukrainian strike systems, the Russian Federation is facing a harsh winter, both literally and figuratively. First and foremost, this concerns thermal power plants and other production facilities that sustain the life of major Russian cities.
Shock. Russians are already being prepared for a new catastrophe. Experts are warning that the effects of the latest government decisions are just around the corner, and in the next 20 years, pensioners will face a real upheaval. What does this mean for every Russian, and what is the Kremlin condemning people to once again? Watch. In
Russia, pensions are being discussed again, this time without trying to pretend that everything is under control. Economists from the Russian Academy of Sciences are saying outright that in 20 years the country will need a new pension reform. Not because someone wants it, but because otherwise the system simply won't survive.
There will be no easy life for you, and we will be asking much more strictly.
There will be fewer able-bodied people and more pensioners. This means one thing: the current model will not be able to provide for those who retire in the 2040s. And even now, those who live on a pension today are already feeling it.
If it weren't for my children, I would have literally starved to death. I'm just being honest.
They won't let you do anything. If anyone tries to speak up, they'll be quickly silenced. That's how our government knows how to do things, right?
Russian pensioners are far from being a picture of a peaceful old age. These are lines at clinics, saving on medicine, bags of pasta bought on sale, utility bills that get more noticeable every year than any promised indexation.
Potatoes?
It's just a disaster. I don't even let myself buy cabbage unless I really have to. And potatoes now, that's a real problem.
Chicken, damn, that's just a whole other story. Chicken is already expensive, and don't even get me started on turkey. And fish, it's like $500 and up. I'm outraged about potatoes. Why are potatoes so expensive?
Some people toil away at their dakas just to get through the summer without extra expenses. Some keep working as long as they have the strength because a single pension is only enough for the bare essentials, and not always even that. In big cities it's still bearable, but in the regions it's almost impossible.
To them, we're just plain cattle, nothing more. As long as they're alive, that's all that matters. The main thing is that they have enough. And the people? What about the people? The people will survive even worse than this. They deserve our deepest respect.
We have a lot of us. How to put it, low-income people, including myself. My pension is 14,000. I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people like me. Well, the situation is quite difficult. I want to work. Let's hope for Putin as well, that he keeps his promise to raise pensions for retirees.
Now, specialists say that if nothing changes, things will only get worse. Currently, the balance is maintained by budget injections and subsidies that cover the deficit of the pension fund. But as the population ages, this deficit will only continue to grow. Moreover, starting January 1st, 2026, the value-added tax VAT in Russia will be increased. The rate will rise from 20% to 22%. This means that everything an ordinary person buys, food, goods, services, will become more expensive.
The funniest thing is that officials even claim that the amendments submitted to the government will benefit the economy, since they will allow the Bank of Russia to lower the key interest rate. First of all, expecting that any tax increase could in principle put the economy on a higher growth trajectory is simply foolish.
Raising the retirement age only postponed the problem, it didn't solve it. Russia is gradually approaching a point where the choices will become much tougher. Either reduce spending, raise the retirement age again, or change the very principle of how pensions are calculated. Each option will be even less appealing to some than the others. The irony is that the poverty of today's Russian pensioners is not an exception to the system, but its most honest reflection. Those who are young now may receive even more meager payments in the future. Life will not get easier on its own. The forecasts do not promise gradual improvement. They predict increased pressure, a shrinking workforce, and a growing proportion of elderly people. And this is a direct path to the social system becoming much more strained.
That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.